This playlist will introduce videos that cover the general process and general goals of translation for propositional logic, as well as going over about 5 examples initially. I might try and add some more examples, in which case I'll notify you that the playlist has been modified. So let's start off by thinking about the goal of translation for propositional logic. Remember that in categorical logic, our goal was to take an English sentence and to reformulate it as one of those 4 standard form categorical statements, but to leave it in English. In translation for propositional logic, our goal is to take an English sentence and to translate it completely into our formal system. So our final product is going to have nothing but capitalized letters to represent simple statements, logical connectives to talk about the relationships between simple statements or to modify the truth values for simple statements, and parentheses to disambiguate the scope for those logical connectives. So our goal, convert that English sentence into a well-formed formula in our propositional logic. That is, one that is true or false, that makes sense in formalism, in the formal system. That well-formed formula is going to express the same relationships between the truth values of the simple statements as we understand the relationships being expressed in the English sentence. So let's then think about how we go about doing that. Our capitalized letters are going to be the first letter of a significant word, and they're going to represent simple affirmative statements. That is, a statement that asserts that something is true. To modify those simple statements, that is to deny their truth, or to connect them together, that is to assert a relationship between the truth values of those simple statements, we'll use our logical connectives. And we have the tilde, the wedge, which is disjunction, the dot, which is conjunction, the horseshoe, which is the conditional, and the triple bar, which is the biconditional. In order to determine what the scope of each of the logical connectives is in a given translation, we'll use our parentheses as that very simple grammar that disambiguates the scope of logical connectives whenever it's necessary to do so. So let's now go through the general translation steps that I outlined in the propositional logic lecture. So we'll start off with an English sentence. Here we've got studying for the test is necessary for passing the test, but studying is not sufficient for passing. We've got 2 words that are all capitals, and that is my indication to you that we have 2 simple statements in the sentence. One should be symbolized using a capital S, i.e. studying for the test. The other should be symbolized by using a capital P, i.e. passing the test. Now we want to identify the logical form words. So we look at the sentence and we say, okay, is necessary for is a logical form phrase. It introduces a conditional. But is a logical form word. It introduces a dot. Is sufficient for is a logical form word or phrase. It introduces a conditional. And not is a logical form word. It introduces negation. So now that we have each of those logical form words or phrases, then we want to introduce, in our first step, capitalized letters for the simple affirmative sentences, keeping our punctuation and our logical form words. So we've got this hybrid between formalism and English, and that generates the following. S is necessary for P, comma, but S is not sufficient for P. Once we've got our hybrid in place, all the logical form words are there, and our simple statements are now symbolized with capitalized letters, we can introduce the connectives that are appropriate for each of the logical form words or phrases. So our next step then is to just introduce those connectives. So S is necessary for P will introduce a horseshoe or conditional. S is sufficient for P will also introduce a horseshoe or a conditional, but we're going to have to decide what the antecedent for each of these conditionals is and what the consequent is. The antecedent always goes on the left hand, the open end of our horseshoe or conditional. The consequent always goes on the right hand side, the closed or curved end of our horseshoe or conditional. So is necessary for expresses a conditional statement such that S being necessary for P, if P is true, S also has to be true, and is sufficient for expresses a conditional statement such that if S is true, that's all we need to know that P is true. So when we introduce our conditionals, then we're going to put P here as the antecedent of the is necessary for conditional, and S as the consequent of the is necessary for conditional. S is sufficient for will be the antecedent of our is sufficient for conditional, and P will be the consequent of our is sufficient for conditional. Not introduces the tilde, since not is embedded in and next to is sufficient for. It will probably be on the outside here, modifying this whole statement. S is sufficient for P. But finally introduces our dot. So now we've got our logical connectives and our simple statements together. All we have to do to finish our translation is to introduce parentheses to indicate the proper scope of each connective. So S is necessary for P, comma, suggests that that's an independent clause in our original English sentence. It says that is one self-contained thought. And so it's likely that we're going to introduce our parentheses around P horseshoe S. Our dot then is going to connect that whole phrase together with everything on the other side. Now, our only remaining ambiguity then is whether or not our parentheses go on the outside of this or they go on the inside of our tilde. So S is not sufficient for seems to suggest that it's not the case that S is sufficient for P. And that would be S horseshoe P, where the whole thing gets negated. It's not the case that S is sufficient for P. If it were tilde S horseshoe P, then the not likely would be in front of our S here. It's not S is sufficient for P. But since it's embedded in the other logical form phrase, that suggests that it negates that relationship. So we're going to use those cues from our logical form words, from our punctuation, and from the context of the original sentence to introduce our parentheses to disambiguate the scope of those logical connectives. And that gives us something like this. P horseshoe S in parentheses dot tilde S horseshoe P in parentheses. So this says passing is necessary. Studying is necessary for passing the test, and studying is not sufficient for passing the test, and that seems to be the relationships between simple statements that are expressed in the original English sentence. In the next video, we'll try and go through another 4 examples.